It began with silence. In the year 1347, the world felt wide and strong. Cities were growing. Trade ships crossed the seas. Roads carried carts filled with grain, cloth, and hope. Church bells marked the hours. Markets were loud. Fields were full of workers. Life was hard, but it was known. The seasons turned as they always had. Kings ruled, priests prayed, families worked and slept and dreamed.
Europe was not alone. To the east, across deserts and mountains, great empires stood. The Mongol Empire stretched across Asia. It connected lands that had once been far apart. Traders followed long roads from China to the Mediterranean Sea. They carried silk and spices. They carried stories. They also carried something unseen.
Far away in the dry lands of Central Asia, a sickness lived among small wild animals. It hid in fleas. The fleas lived on rats. The rats moved with caravans and ships. No one saw the danger. No one knew it was coming. The world was linked by trade more than ever before. Ships sailed from port to port. They hugged the coasts of the Black Sea. They crossed the Mediterranean. They stopped at busy cities like Constantinople, Messina, Genoa, and Venice. These cities were rich and proud. They were gates between east and west. They were full of narrow streets and crowded homes. They were perfect places for rats.
In 1347, ships arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. The journey had been long. The sailors were weak. Some were already dead. Their bodies were covered with dark swellings. Their skin was marked with black spots. The living were sick and afraid. The ships carried more than cargo. They carried death. The people of Messina did not understand what they were seeing. They had known sickness before. Fevers came and went, but this was different. The swellings grew under the arms and near the groin. They were painful. They were called buboes. Soon after, the fever came, then chills, then weakness. Many died within days. Some died within hours.
Fear spread faster than the illness. Families shut their doors. Some fled to the countryside. Others prayed in churches. The sickness did not stop. It moved from house to house. It moved from street to street. It did not care if someone was rich or poor. It did not care if someone was young or old. From Sicily, the disease moved north. Ships carried it to Italy. Genoa and Venice were struck. Florence soon followed. The cities were close and crowded. Waste filled the streets. Rats found easy shelter. Fleas jumped from rat to rat. When rats died, the fleas searched for new hosts. They bit humans. By early 1348, much of Italy was in chaos. In Florence, the great city of art and trade, thousands fell ill. The sound of church bells never stopped. Graves filled quickly. Workers could not dig fast enough. Bodies were placed in large pits. Some were buried without names. Some were left in homes. The sickness did not stay in Italy. It crossed the Alps. It entered France. It reached Spain. It traveled along rivers and roads. It followed trade routes like a shadow. By the end of 1348, it had reached Paris. It reached London in 1349. It reached the edges of the known world. In London, the city was crowded and dirty. Narrow lanes were filled with waste. Water was not clean. People lived close together. When the disease arrived, it moved like fire through dry grass.
Whole families died in a week. Streets grew quiet. Shops closed. Ships sat empty in the harbor. No one knew what caused the plague. Some said it was a sign from God. Some said the air was poisoned. Others blamed strangers and outsiders. In their fear, people searched for someone to blame. Jewish communities were attacked in many cities. They were accused without proof. Many were killed. Fear made people cruel. Doctors tried to help. They wore long robes and masks filled with sweet herbs. They believed bad smells caused illness. They tried to clean the air with smoke. They used bloodletting. They used strange mixtures. Nothing worked. The disease moved on. There were different forms of the plague. The most common was the bubonic plague. It caused the painful swellings. Another form attacked the lungs. This was the pneumonic plague. It spread from person to person through coughs. It killed even faster. A third form infected the blood. It turned the skin dark. Death came quickly. In some towns, half the people died. In others, even more. It is believed that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population was lost in 4 years. This meant tens of millions of people. The numbers are hard to grasp. Villages disappeared. Farms were left empty. Fields grew wild. In the countryside, peasants died in their homes. Crops rotted in the fields. Animals wandered without care. In cities, carts moved through the streets to collect the dead. The smell of death hung in the air. The normal rules of life began to break. Some people tried to live as if there were no tomorrow. They spent money freely. They ate and drank without limit. Others turned deeply to faith. Groups called flagellants walked from town to town. They whipped themselves in public. They believed pain would bring forgiveness. Church leaders did not always support them. Fear was stronger than order. Kings and nobles were not safe. Many rulers died. In England, King Edward III survived, but many of his close family did not. In France, the royal family suffered heavy losses. The plague did not respect crowns. Trade slowed. Ships stayed in port. Markets were empty. Workers were gone. Those who survived found a strange new world. There were fewer people to work the land. Labor became valuable. Peasants could ask for better pay. In some places, laws were passed to force wages down. Tension grew between workers and rulers. The plague changed the balance of power. In England, anger over wages and taxes would later lead to the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. In other regions, serfdom began to weaken. The old system had cracked under the weight of loss. Art and culture were also changed. Painters began to show death more often. Images of skeletons and fading flesh appeared in churches and books. The idea of the dance of death became common. It showed people from all walks of life led away by death. It reminded viewers that no one could escape. Writers tried to make sense of what had happened. In Italy, Giovanni Boccaccio wrote about a group of young people who fled Florence to escape the plague. His work described fear, love, and survival. It showed how people reacted when the world seemed to end. The church faced deep questions. Many priests died while caring for the sick. Some were praised for their courage. Others fled in fear. People wondered why God would allow such suffering. Faith was shaken for some. For others, it grew stronger. The plague did not strike only Europe. It moved through the Middle East. It reached North Africa. Cities like Cairo were hit hard.
Trade routes across the Islamic world carried the disease far and wide. In some regions, records show that more than half the population died. China had already suffered outbreaks before Europe felt the full force. The disease likely began its long journey there. The vast Mongol trade network helped it spread. What had once been a bridge between worlds became a path for death.
The years between 1347 and 1351 were the worst. By 1351, the wave had slowed. Many who could die had died. Survivors were left to rebuild. Towns were smaller. Fields were empty. The sound of children playing was rare in some places. But the plague did not disappear forever. It returned in later years. Smaller outbreaks struck cities again and again. Each time, fear came back. Each time, people remembered the first great wave. Why was this time so important? Because it changed the course of history. The loss of so many people broke old systems. It opened space for new ideas. With fewer workers, wages rose in some areas. Some peasants gained freedom. The power of landowners weakened. In the long run, these changes helped shape the modern world. The shift in labor led to economic growth in some regions. The questioning of old beliefs helped spark new thinking. Some historians see the seeds of the Renaissance in the wake of the plague. When so much was lost, people began to look at life in new ways. Yet the human cost cannot be measured only in change. It was grief beyond measure. Imagine waking to find half your town gone. Imagine burying friends every week. Imagine not knowing if tomorrow would be your last day. The Black Death forced people to face the fragility of life. It showed how small humans are in the face of nature. A tiny flea, a small bite, and an empire trembled. The mystery of the plague lasted for centuries. People did not know about bacteria. They did not know about Yersinia pestis, the germ that caused the disease. It was not until the late 19th century that scientists identified the true cause. By then, the Black Death had passed into history, but its shadow remained.
Modern science tells us that the plague bacteria lived in fleas. The fleas fed on infected rats. When rats died, the fleas sought new hosts. Ships were perfect homes for rats. Ports were perfect homes for fleas. Trade became a bridge for disease. Climate may have played a role. Some studies suggest changes in weather affected rodent populations in Asia. When food became scarce, rodents moved closer to humans. The chain of events began long before 1347. It built slowly, unseen. The Black Death also revealed how connected the world had become. Though people in Europe felt isolated, they were part of a larger web. Goods, ideas, and disease moved along the same routes. The plague was one of the first global disasters. As the years passed after 1351, life slowly returned. Crops were planted again. Children were born. Cities rebuilt walls and markets. But memories did not fade quickly. Stories were told for generations. Grandparents spoke of carts of bodies, of empty streets, of prayers that seemed to fall into silence. Graveyards from that time still exist. In some places, mass graves have been found beneath modern streets. Bones lie close together. They are silent witnesses. They remind us of how quickly life can change. The Black Death also changed medicine. Though doctors did not find the cure at the time, the need for better knowledge grew. Over centuries, this drive led to new discoveries. The study of disease became more careful. Quarantine began to be used. The word comes from the Italian quaranta, meaning 40. Ships were held for 40 days before entering port. It was a lesson learned in fear. Venice became one of the first cities to create special hospitals for plague victims. These were called lazarettos. They were built on islands away from the city. It was an early form of public health control. The memory of loss forced change. In art, the image of death remained strong for many years. Tombs became more detailed. Paintings showed both beauty and decay. Life was precious because it was uncertain. This idea shaped the culture of Europe in deep ways. The Black Death did not end the Middle Ages, but it shook them. It broke the sense of stability. It showed that no wall was high enough, no king powerful enough to stop a tiny force of nature. And yet, humanity endured. Out of loss came resilience. Survivors married. They had children. They told stories. They built new systems. They searched for meaning. The world after the plague was not the same as before. It was smaller in number, but different in spirit. There was more movement between social classes. There was more questioning of authority. There was more hunger for change.
In England, records show that workers demanded fair wages. In France, social unrest simmered. In Italy, city-states competed with new energy. The balance of power shifted slowly but surely. The plague also influenced exploration. As trade patterns changed, nations looked for new routes. In time, this would lead to voyages across unknown seas. The desire to control trade and avoid old dangers pushed ships farther than before. The memory of the Black Death lived on in quiet ways. It shaped laws, it shaped art, it shaped fear itself. Even centuries later, when new diseases appeared, people remembered the Great Plague. Today, we know how to treat the disease with antibiotics. We understand germs. We understand how illness spreads. But in the 14th century, knowledge was limited. The plague was a dark cloud with no clear source. It is easy now to see the patterns, the trade routes, the ships, the rats. But at the time, people saw only suffering. They saw neighbors fall. They saw families torn apart. There is something both terrifying and humbling in this story. Terrifying because it shows how fragile life is. Humbling because it shows how strong humanity can be. Across Europe, church bells rang for the dead. In small villages, candles burned through the night. In great cities, silence fell over once busy streets. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, slowly, it exhaled. The plague did not destroy civilization. It scarred it. It reshaped it. It forced it to grow in new directions. The pain of those years became part of the foundation of the modern world. When we look back at 1347 to 1351, we see more than disease. We see a turning point. We see a test of endurance. We see the power of connection, both good and bad. A single flea carried a bacterium. A single ship carried infected rats. A single port opened its gates. From these small events came one of the greatest disasters in human history. The Black Death was not just a chapter of loss, it was a mirror. It showed people their fears, it showed them their limits, it showed them their strength. In the end, what remains is not only the memory of death, but the proof of survival. Cities still stand where half the people once fell. Nations rose from the ashes of grief. Humanity moved forward. The silence that began the story did not last forever. From the darkness of the plague years came a new dawn, and the world, forever changed, kept turning.